can feel you fade away. From the kitchen to the bathroom sinking, your steps keep me awake. Don't
Okay, I'm just going to wait for everyone to take their seats. All right, we have a very cozy crowd here today. Is everyone ready to go? Yeah? Good to start? Comfortable? All right. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening here at Space Tech for Mobility. Together with France's National Center for Space Studies and French Tech Singapore, we are very pleased to organize in conjunction with the French Singapore Year of Innovation. And as part of the Year of Innovation, actually last year at Vivatech in Paris, we had actually organized a conference, SGInnovate. We aim to bridge innovation between France and Singapore. It was actually in Paris where we met and connected with CNES, whom we have partnered with, together with the French Tech Singapore to organize today's event. And last September, we actually had our second anniversary, SGInnovate second anniversary, and Minister Heng Swee Keat, our finance minister, was actually our guest of honor. And during that event, we actually announced that we had invested in 45 startups and actually had grown 23,000 strong deep tech community, which all of you are part of. Thank you very much. And this 2019, together with our esteemed friends and partners, we look forward to doing even more and providing even more value to the deep tech ecosystem. And now, without further ado, may I please invite His Excellency, Mr. Marc Ebensuur, Ambassador of France to Singapore, to say a few words. A round of applause, Mr. Ambassador, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to this event. And I wanted to express, my warmest thanks to SGInnovate for hosting, this event in connection with le CNES, the French Space Agency, and also La French Tech. And as you said, so it's part of the Year of Innovation. Let me confirm to everyone that we will conclude this Year of Innovation next March, the 15th of March, and it will coincide with the Economic Forum between France and Singapore. I think it's an excellent opportunity also to highlight, what has been accomplished on space collaboration between our two countries during this Year of Innovation. And actually, I think we have made quite a substantial progress. Let me just, make some step back, because it started with the visit of the French president, March 2017. And on that occasion, there was a MOU which was signed between EDB and Austin, which is the office on space collaboration within the EDB, and CNES, the French Space Agency. And since then, we managed to organize also some very important events to basically, gather together all the different stakeholders on space cooperation. So we had a seminar on space in the margin of Singapore Air Show. I think it was a year ago. Also, as you said, an event in the margins of Vivatech. And during these events, gathering all the different stakeholders on the space cooperation, the issue of new space was identified as a new area of collaboration. And I think that SGInnovate is very well, designated to foster these connections between the French and Singaporean ecosystem on space and how space technologies, could apply to mobility. So I'm very pleased to attend this event tonight, because I think it's completely in line with what we have been engaging since we started the together, and also that it will open, more exchanges between our two ecosystems, between exchanges for startups and smaller enterprise who can develop solutions like on IoT, on shipping, on many other areas where you have use of space technology. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I wish everyone a fruitful evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Round of applause, please. And sorry, I neglected to mention just now that last year, SGInnovate also had the honor of welcoming Mr. Moniu Majoubi, the Secretary of State for Digital Affairs, and together with the French tech community here in Singapore, we are looking forward to collaborating much more moving forward. And now, may I please invite one of our panelists today, Dr. Gilles, the Director for CNES, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Rabin, please.
Thank
Round of applause, please.
Prepare some speech, yeah. Dear friends of SGInnovate, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur de France, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's a great honor to have been invited to Singapore today to talk about innovation and mobility in the heart of the world's most innovative smart city. You have mastered the techniques of data integration. You have realized the importance of working with others to network instead of remaining caught up in silo. And above all, you have fully understood that innovation requires the synergy of technological convergence. May I say more personally, as I'm an associate professor in France and invited professor in Shanghai in the field of the development of smart city, I must confess that coming to Singapore is like scoring again Manchester United in Old Trafford. It's very impressive. If you don't know, Paris Saint-Germain won again yesterday again Manchester United. It was a private joke. Now, if you laugh now at the end, you understood that we win against Manchester United. Okay, that is much more impressive if you understand that we win. Thank you for giving me the privilege of delivering the session keynote address. Allow me to say a few words about CNES and about innovation before I move on to the question of mobility. CNES is a French space agency. It employs more than 2,300 people and has an annual budget of more than 2 billion euros. The French Space Agency has been entrusted with 3 principal missions, namely scientific research, the development of defense system, and the development of the space industry ecosystem, with world-renowned leaders such as Airbus Defence and Space and Thales Alenia Space, well known even in Singapore. Concerning CNES' contribution to science, you have no doubt heard about the seismometer that NASA placed on Mars. But you may not be aware that the instrument was developed by Space Research Laboratory supervised by CNES. Our goal is simple: to enable French science and industry to develop and maintain their level of excellence. As Director for Innovation, Application and Science, my role is therefore to propose the best strategy for achieving these objectives. However, the world has changed. New space players try to pass us off as grandfather, preoccupied with long post-war. They are no longer in tune with today's development. They are mistaken. We understand exactly what is happening, and we are ready to invent tomorrow's space technology and application. We are ready to take on the many new realities. For innovation, I will start by describing the new paradigm or business model we are facing. A long time ago, more than 5 years, which in economic terms it's prehistory, the space industry developed launcher and satellite with the best possible technology, irrespective of the price. Now, however, the space industry has become the third industrial evolution driven by data. The customer no longer asks for the best satellite or launcher, but rather the cost of the data it needs for its company. It does not care whether the data is collected via IoT, the forthcoming 5G networks, or Copernicus, European satellite program. So our industry has to understand that the customer is right and that techno-push is no longer the solution. We need to deliver the best data at the best price with a good enough product. To meet this challenge, CNES has understood that the answer lies with the customer rather than with the engineer. We are now developing, I say that because I'm not an engineer. We are now developing a local approach with customers in 3 sectors: health, environment, and mobility, by working directly with startups in one of the largest incubators in the world, Station F. Mobility is therefore our main focus. In keeping with our core mission, we continue to work in the same way. We are not specialists in this field, so we do provide technical solution by GSNS and in particular Galileo, which is the most accurate system in the world for geopositioning data. Our objective is thus, one of the end, to develop partnership with customers in this field with Vedecom, Research Institute for Autonomous Car, SNCF, French Railway, and Deutsche Bahn, German Railway, for autonomous train, and the Association of the French Ship Owner, GCAN, for autonomous boats, to better grasp the need of manufacturers. And on the other hand, we aim to collaborate with startups to jointly develop technical solutions and enable them through technology transfer to offer the best solution at the best price in an emerging but already very competitive market. To sum up, in my opinion, what are the needs of the startup? What kind of support can we deliver? The first question with the first need of startup is technological background, technological invention capacity. And in CNES was the capacity to transfer technology to startup and to help them to develop their business. The second pillar is funding, money, finance. And we are developing a VC capital fund in France with CNES, but also with private company. Third is turnover, customer, money. And we are able to develop the connection with big companies like Airbus Defence and Space and Thales. You will have understood that we have the technology, partnership, and startup to position ourselves in this market. But this is not enough in itself. We have to continue challenging ourselves to work with the best people in the field so that we continue offering the best solution. Here in Singapore, you have the cream of the crop, the best of the best, and that's why we are here to learn from you and develop partnership with potential for the future. The game has just begun. Let's continue working together to invent the future of mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rabin. Now I would like to begin today's session proper. May I please invite our moderator for today, Dr. Bidushi Bhattacharya, the co-founder of Entrepreneurs Hub. A round of applause, please. And then next, we have Mr. Thierry Chappuis, the expert for mobility application, National Center for Space Studies. And finally, Mr. Wee Wei Tat, the Office of Space Technology and Industry, Singapore Economic Development Board. A round of applause for our panelists today, please.
People here are already working in the space sector. Can you just raise your hand? Okay, that's about 10%, I'd say. I'm hoping. All right, can you guys hear me now? So, I mean, enough of you raised your hand when I asked about the space sector that I'm assuming that you heard me. So what I'm hoping is we saw about 10% of you guys are in the sector now that after this discussion, after you hear a bit more about the possibilities in the space sector, that you go home and maybe a year from now that number will be 30 or 40% of the audience. So I would like to introduce our speakers. Okay, let me just grab my sheet real quick, excuse me. All right, so we have a great panel for you tonight. We're talking about space in the context of mobility. So first we have Mr. Thierry Chappuis. He's an expert on mobility applications from CNES. And then we have Mr. Wee Wei Tat from the EDB Office of Space Technology and Industry. So the way we'd like to do this is we'd like you guys to participate. We have Slido up there. We have the link, and then the hashtag will be SpaceTech. If you're not familiar with how to use it, go ahead and just ask somebody around you. It's really quite straightforward. You go to your browser and you put in slide.do, and then the questions come up once you put in the hashtag of SpaceTech. So we have a poll question or two in there, and then we would like you to dynamically go in and put in questions as we move through this presentation. So let me start by asking our speakers to kindly introduce yourselves. I think we'd be most interested in hearing about your professional background, because I see a lot of people here are sort of at the early stage of their careers, and it would be great to hear about your vision for the future of the space industry. So why don't we start with you, Thierry?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Mr. Chappuis. I'm graduated for the Electronic Engineering School in France, and I've got also a master for space system. And I joined CNES rather a long time ago, because it was in 1986, and I spent 20 years working for the space segment. I was in charge of developing computers for the space segment, and I participate to several programs like Earth Observation, Microsatellite program of CNES. Then I joined the navigation division. Spent 5 years there, and I was responsible of assessing the performances of the GNSS receivers, because people who works with this technology know that the performances are very dependent on the environment, so we want to really understand the problem and also to promote the use of Galileo, because Galileo is now fully operational. And then 3 years ago, I joined the application and downstream services, and my role there is to promote the use of space technologies in the ITS domain, so intelligent transport system, and especially on autonomous vehicle. Regarding the mobility, I think that mobility has always been a part of the history. So what is new in the mobility? So I think that the definition could be mobility is the capability for the people, for the goods, even for the service, to move freely, and I will say quickly. And considering the evolution, there is a big trend to have more and more people in urban areas. At the moment, you have 50% of people in urban areas. In 2050, around 70% of people will live there. And so this is a problem. Everybody knows the problem of traffic jam, the problem of pollution. So the smarter mobility means a mobility safer, cleaner, more efficient, and more accessible. And when you say that, you say, well, what are the solutions to achieve that? I will say that maybe some solutions which are already in study. One point important is to consider the multimodal transportation. So the ability to take the train and to take the metro, to take the bus on a smooth way without any problem. I think autonomous vehicle will be important because they will change the relation we have with the car, and also the dynamic information. That means that you will receive information about the traffic, so very precise information about the traffic, so that you can route in a dynamic way your route. And also to go from a rather static network of transport to transport more based on demand, so that you need a transport. You have your smartphone, you ask for the vehicle, and then you got the vehicle. So globally, I think that now majority of the movement of people are based on individual car, and the trend is to go to what we call a case for connected, automated, safe and electric car. So this is the trend, and also the idea is to reduce the number of vehicles in the big cities.
Hi, my name is Weitat. I'm from the Economic Development Board of Singapore. So I'm from this group called Capital Goods. And within Capital Goods, I look at a couple of things. I look at some of the control and automation companies who have set up here in Singapore, and my role there is really to help them, expand their operations, manufacturing or business services here in Singapore. I also look at some of the aerospace accounts as well. And space is one of the additional portfolio that I look at as well under the Austin, which stands for Office for Space Technology and Industry. So those are the portfolio that I look at in EDB. And really, what we are doing in Austin is really trying to create in Singapore an innovation hub that companies can thrive in, that they can put their investments here and then create new products, new services to serve the greater ASEAN market. So that in a nutshell is really what EDB and Austin is really about, which is really helping companies to grow and to scale their operations and to capture opportunities around the ASEAN region. So my first job wasn't really in EDB. So my first job was actually in a startup. So I was actually a software engineer. My office is actually just a couple of, it's just at Boat Quay. So it's one of those shop houses where it's very nice environment along the river. So that's where I started. It was really in the tourism business. So I was with this company called WeGo.com. Not sure if you guys have actually heard or use it, but yeah, I developed the flights backend. So if you're using it, then it's a very good consolation for me. Yeah, so that was where I started, and I transited to EDB, where I look into the industry development aspect. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to go back to something that Dr. Rabin said at the very beginning. We are talking about a new era now where rather than being interested in satellites per se, people are now looking at data. They're interested in data, getting information, and they really don't care where it comes from. And in that context, we're going to talk about the issue of mobility. And can you just give me a general description of what you think mobility is? I know you talked about, Terry, you talked about autonomous vehicles, but are there other sectors where mobility is an issue?
Yes, regarding the satellite technologies, I think that the high-resolution Earth observation could be very interesting. I know that there are some studies just to help and to build the high-definition maps. So if you consider the autonomous vehicle, you need a very precise maps. And information coming from the satellite is very useful. Naturally, GNSS is an important sensor of the vehicle. It's not the only one, but it's a very important sensor. And with the emergence of a new constellation, there is Galileo, but there is also Beidou, the Chinese one. So you have a multiplicity of signals. So I think that this will contribute to improve the performances of this vehicle, and to contribute also to demonstrate the safety, because one of the major problems for autonomous vehicle is to demonstrate the safety. And maybe also telecommunication could be an alternative where you don't have any terrestrial connection. Maybe in Singapore it will not be a problem, because Singapore is an urban area. I think that the connectivity will be probably very good. In a country like France, we have countryside, so you don't have any connectivity everywhere. So in that case, the satellites could be an alternative, because the connectivity is very important. It's very important for the vehicle. It's very important also for the system, because the system needs to have real-time information to be efficient, to inform the driver that there is a problem, to inform the driver that there is a traffic jam, and for example, also to build the maps, to update the maps. The connectivity is really very important, and satellite could be part of this connectivity.
So for me, I've always related mobility with connectivity, and it's about on-demand connectivity, real-time connectivity, but that's just one aspect of it. So I think what's more interesting is, what are the potential applications that could then arise as a result of, greater mobility connectivity. So when you think of GNSS, GPS, basically you open up a whole suite of location-based services, applications that you can commercialize it, you can make it into meaningful applications. So I think that's where the exciting part about mobility really is. I guess it's really about figuring out, what the speaker has mentioned earlier, is about connecting with the customers, right? Trying to understand what are some of their needs, and where could mobility then come in to play a part to address some of these concerns, issues, or challenges that they have. And I think for space it's a bit challenging, because I guess the traditional users of space application technologies has always been the governments and the military. So they're quite familiar with how to digest certain information coming from space and how to use it. But I guess for the commercial side, what my sense is that the commercial users are actually not that savvy in terms of leveraging data from space or space infrastructure, and therefore there needs to be some kind of education to show them what's possible. And it's not a straightforward process, I'll say. It's a lot of engaging with the customers to kind of know better what is the job to be done, or how can things be done in a more effective manner. So to me it's exciting, and I think that the potential hasn't really been unlocked yet, because when we talk about new space, we're actually talking about that hockey stick growth. But hockey stick growth can only come when commercials really start to embrace some of these technologies. That's where you get the markets and the size. So I think that's currently in process. I think we are starting to see signals to say that the commercial market is starting to warm up to some of these technologies. And the technology itself is also, when you think about the technology, the satellites are getting smaller, cheaper, more cost competitive. And if you look at the launch cost, it's also steadily declining. So all these factors are all contributing to the emergence of this new space that we talk about. And I would say that we need a little bit more patience, because I think we need to give the commercial markets a little bit more time to adapt and adopt some of these technologies as well.
Well, since you mentioned new space, this might be a time to go to our first poll question. Can we get that posted, please? So the first poll question is, would you consider joining the space sector at this point?
Is that the question for us or for
Well, so this is everybody on their phones, and we'll ask you too. This is people on their phones have responded. And okay, this is interesting. Can you guys see it up there? All right, so let me just tell you the results. The majority of people are saying answer D, that they have no plans either way, they're just here to learn more, so that's great. We're hoping that at the end of this evening you go away and that your answer changes to either A or B. 20% of the audience here says that you would like to work at an MNC or a large company, and 36% of you say that you would like to work at a startup. And 4% say that space is too complicated and or risky, so maybe we can convince you otherwise. All right, so keep going into the questions. This is the poll question for you with an ABC multiple choice, but there is another poll question that's going to be posted shortly, and we also have an area where you can type in questions for us to get to in a little bit. So you guys just mentioned on-demand requests for service and getting space involved in the context of mobility. We're definitely in a different realm now that commercial space is actually dominant. I was just reading a report earlier today from Bryce Technologies in Washington, D.C. in the U.S., and it turns out that 79% of the global space economy is now commercial. So that means only 21% comes from the government side. When I first started working for NASA back in the 1980s, NASA was all there was, NASA and ESA, and there was a little bit of stuff from Japan and so on. But we no longer have to pay $600 million per launch with a space shuttle to get something into low Earth orbit. We're at a realm where you can pay something like $25,000 US per kilogram to get your payload up there, which is just an incredible, incredible innovation here. So you think about the number of zeros we've actually taken off of that price point there. We still have some bottlenecks that we have to face. So we know that there is a lack of launch opportunities even now. I know that there are at least a couple people in this room who are working on their own rocket startups. So we do believe in the next few years that there will be more and more opportunities for people to get their space technology up there and into orbit, because in the end, that's the real goal, right? We don't just want to design it and try to get investors to give us money. The end goal is to get stuff to fly. So we know that there will be more opportunities in terms of launch. And we know that we need to improve mission success rates, because the CubeSats that are sent up there now, they don't have a high level of success because people just don't have the test facilities. We don't have the expertise yet. And I think, Weitat, you also mentioned education and just letting people know what's actually possible from space. So as planet Earth just does become more data hungry, what do you guys think are the bottlenecks that prevent us from satisfying customer need? We'll start with you, Terry.
I think that we have now a lot of data. I think that for example, the Earth observation began in the 80s. For example, with the Landsat program, CNES was responsible for the SPOT, which was a civil observation program regarding meteorology. You have information regarding ocean observation. So the data is here. And I think that the problem is to access the data. And we at the moment, we are working to ease the access to the data, and also to offer some services to the application. Because when you speak about the space, you have to make the difference between the space segment, which is something very specific, and the use of space data and services. And so, for example, for the startup, the majority of the startup we are working with are interested by using the space data, because we know that there is a big market on that, and a big with the emergence of artificial intelligence software, we can use better this information. So that means that using the data is there, but the access to the data has to be improved. And considering what we do in Europe, we have the Copernicus program, which is very important because it's dedicated to the environment. And there is an ongoing activity financed by the European community to create some clouds and to ease the access to this data, which is tremendous, to the users. I know also some commercial companies like Airbus, Defense and Space, and they have totally reconsidered the way the customers will access the data. So it's not only an image, it's more a service. So the things are changing, and also the cost is not the same. Because at the very first beginning, it was very costly to have an image, because it was seldom. Now you have many images, and generally many of the algorithms want to see the evolution. So you will have software just to try to fix changes between the image, because they want to see the evolution, for example, regarding the agriculture or regarding the climate. So the model has totally changed, I would say, within 10 years.
Okay. Bottlenecks.
I guess in terms of the volume of data or data being out there, I think it's what I would say is that the view is that data will become, especially if it's just images and everything, it will become increasingly commoditized, and several factors for that would be in terms of how it's just getting cheaper, it's getting more cost competitive to actually launch like a data service, because you can always build CubeSats and you can put sensors, you can take images of it. So in my view is that the data is there. It's just not being unlocked. And when you think about it, why isn't it being unlocked? Then access could be one issue. Another issue or another bottleneck could be that the new users that we're trying to target, or the companies are trying to target, they are generally not savvy in terms of using these images to derive insights for their industry. So for example, in agriculture, you might not have the expertise to maybe digest or interpret SAR or hyperspectral or multispectral images, those kind of capabilities. And so I guess where the industry is kind of headed is really into, I guess the business model is kind of changing as well. It's not just the sale of data, but it's really about insights. How do you take the information, which is increasingly become commoditized, and how do you package that into an information product, or how do you package that into an intelligence product? And that's, I think, where the value would be unlocked eventually. Because if you think of it, as you go down the chain from data to an information product to a service, right? That's where the value add really increases, and that's where it really helps create value for the end users at the end of the day.
All right, so I'm hearing from both of you a lot about data and the need to educate people who are actually in the sector. So maybe we can take a moment to put up some of the questions. Can we do that? We can get the questions page up, because you can see the questions are listed and people have voted. Let's see if we can take one of these questions now, and then we'll just keep going. Why don't we ask both of you, what skill sets are really important right now for the space sector? So I'll start with you, Terry. What skills are really important to enter the space sector?
It's difficult to it's difficult to answer this question because if you consider the space domain, you have all the specialties, mechanical, electrical. So we need all these kind of engineers to do that. Regarding the data and the use of data, I think that now there is really a need of people, specialists in artificial intelligence, deep learning, data mining, and women, and women. So students, I will say, with this, because there is many things to do, and I think that it's a very great amount of information we have collected for 30 years. And with these new technologies, we will extract what is necessary for the service. But regarding the satellite, a big satellite, a microsatellite, a nanosatellite, you have the same problems. It's not on the same scale, and you need to have all the specialties necessary to do that. So it's why it's very interesting, because you address, and for example, in a company like CNES, you can change of position and do jobs which are different.
I kind of echo what Terry said. I think it's quite challenging to pinpoint exactly. I guess space itself is quite multidisciplinary, right? You have mechanical, electrical, software, and all those kind of different capabilities. So I would say it's actually quite difficult. So where we are coming from is basically in terms of capabilities development. If you look at NUS, NTU, basically what we're trying to get them to do is basically the whole suite of small satellite engineering, get them involved, get people excited as well. Once you are involved in building the satellite, you can actually feel, you can actually see, and you can actually experience your hard work being launched, and you can be part of that process. So that's really interesting, and it's helpful for them to also kind of like through that process figure out which parts do they really resonate with them as a professional.
Right, so as somebody who runs a startup, I would say that there are particularly a number of other skills that we also need. I mean, technical science skills are really critical, but I know I've talked to some people here in the audience. We have people interested in space law, and as we commercialize further, we'll need people in business development and marketing. So just because you don't immediately have an engineering or a science degree does not mean that you cannot participate in this sector. As the ecosystem grows, the qualifications will certainly diversify, and getting in on it now, if you're interested and passionate, this is a very good time, because you can actually define the direction that the sector will take with your own contributions that may be beyond science and engineering. All right, so let's go on to the next question. We keep talking about data and the need for data in the context of mobility. So let me ask you guys, what do you think is more important, hardware development or software development? And the reason I ask this is we've got people thinking about startups, and this might help inform their decisions as to which direction to go.
Also in that case, it depends if you consider the space segment of the use of data. In the space segment, generally you need to develop new technology. For example, to have a satellite more integrated, you have a new propulsion technology. So that means in that case, if you've got a technology which is really efficient and different from the other one, you get a great advantage. Considering the data, I think we have a great amount of data, but we have the capacity to store it. With the cloud, it's no longer a problem. So in that case, if you are on the usage of the data, for me the software is the most important quality to have, and the most important part of the business.
For me, I guess the most important part would probably be software as well. I mean, just a gut feel. I guess in terms of hardware, it's pretty much commercialized, commercial off-the-shelf products that you can kind of like quickly, get and put together maybe a very low quality CubeSat, but you can already start doing something and validating whether there's a customer need or business demand from using commercially off-the-shelf hardware. So where the secret sauce or where things would eventually get differentiated would be in terms of the delivery of the service and the quality of the data or the insights that you can deliver. So that's the part I think that's where software and I hate to use the word AI because it's very broad, but it's along those lines, analytics, AI, where you can really unlock data that is currently or not say currently, but is likely to be more readily available.
I think you just brought up something that's really important. Hardware is now off the shelf. You think about that. You don't have to custom build parts for satellites anymore. You can go and build your own CubeSat, which would be a very basic thing that you could launch into space to do, some basic imaging or radio transmission. You can do that for about $300,000, which is absolutely mind-blowing. My first job out of college was on the Hubble Space Telescope, $4 billion, versus say $300,000 for a small CubeSat. So in terms of risk, there is a perceived sense of risk in the space sector. So let me ask you guys, what do you think it would take to lower the sense of risk, not only for entrepreneurs, but also for investors or anybody else who wants to enter the sector?
I think that maybe you have to consider the problem at technical level or financial level. I would say for the technical part, risk is part of the space business. You have a launcher. A launcher is a very complicated machine, and when the satellite is on orbit, no maintenance, you can't repair it. So that means that if you have a problem, you rarely get a problem. Considering the experience we have, I would say 40 years of experience, I don't think the risk is not so important, because there are not a lot of failure. If you consider all the satellites, all the launcher, not a lot of failure. And because companies are used to do, which are in the space business, have the methodology, the engineers, all the techniques, which are necessary to guarantee the quality of the satellite. Things are a little bit different if you consider the nano satellite. You have not the same requirement, for example, for the lifetime. For the telecom satellite, the lifetime was 15, 17 years, so it was very difficult to demonstrate. Nano satellites is different, and with the emergence of constellation, it's a little bit different, because it's not so important if you lose a satellite, because you have a constellation, so you have more system vision, so it's different. Regarding the financial risk, even if things have changed, I think that the amount of money necessary to develop a space system is still significant. You have the launch, the satellite, you have to pay for. And the other problem is that you have a minimum time between the beginning of the project and the availability of the service. And I think now it's shorter than 10 years ago. But to say I will have less than 2 years between the beginning of my project and my service, it's not so easy, even with nano, because you have to develop, you have to test the satellite, and you have to find the launcher. So even with newcomers with a small launcher, very often the ability to find a launcher at a short time is not so obvious.
I guess I'll comment from the kind of like the business and the investors kind of perspective. So I guess in terms of lowering the risk in the eyes of from the perspective of the investors and from the business point of view, I guess it has always been about I guess articulating who the customer is. So I guess from companies that I've engaged with, usually their starting point will be, I have this very fanciful technology, it can do this, it can revisit how many times it take, what's the resolution that it can take and everything. So that's great, and I think what's happening right now is that you're starting to see more and more companies coming up with the same pitch to say that, I have this technology that can do this, and it's kind of like comparable, and it's getting a bit difficult to kind of like differentiate between, technologies and companies in that sense. But I guess where would really make a difference would be, if a company or a startup could really articulate and say that, I think that this group of customers have this specific need or unmet needs. And this is where I think my technology can contribute. And I guess if you would want to help to de-risk it further, then it's really about, I'm sure you're making certain assumptions about your customers, right, about some of their needs. And when you take it to the VC, I guess the VC will be also thinking, these are assumptions. So what have you done to kind of like validate these assumptions? So it's nothing new. It's not rocket science, actually. It's basically business model canvas and, the Steve Blank way of, validating your assumptions about certain business models, about the customer needs, about how you deliver the service, about your value propositions and everything. So I think that should be the starting point. And then tech is really an enabler. And that is where you really kind of like convince or kind of reassure the investors and the businesses that, yes, I have a game plan. I have an end goal in mind. I know exactly who my customers are, and I know what exactly are their pain points. And these are the ways that I've done or these are the things that I've done to validate their needs and everything. And this is where satellite fits in. So I think that is a very nice narrative to then, convince at least the investors on the business side of things that yes, it's a well thought through plan, and this is clearly where you're differentiated from the rest.
I like what you said. It's not rocket science, because for many of us it actually is. So in terms of risk, I've also found that people have an elevated perception of risk, right? An elevated perception, the risk that they think is there is actually not there. Those of us who work in the sector know that most of the time stuff works, but unfortunately, when you have something like a rocket exploding on the launch pad or some tragedy like that, it makes the news all around the world, and that's what people notice. They don't notice the 99 missions that are successful. They don't notice the hundreds of satellites that are launched every year, but every time something negative happens, that's where they really get nervous. And I think one of the things that we can do with investors is to educate them, to let them know that most of the time this stuff does work. And in the case that something does explode, there's insurance for that, so you wouldn't be losing all your money. Let's get to the poll questions. There are something like 25 questions, so thank you, everybody. I think what I'll do is I'll pick one question for each of you guys, and I'll base that on the number of upvotes that they've gotten. All right, so why don't we put you on the spot first, Wei Tat? The question is, does the Singapore government plan to fund space tech startups as is done in Luxembourg and the UK? If so, when? And if not, should we look for funding overseas?
I mean, there are existing channels and mechanisms to fund startups, right? So there's ESG, and there's SGInnovate that you can tap on for the networks and everything. And for companies who are basically looking to scale, beyond the startup stage and into, to creating of new products, new services, or setting up regional HQs, then that's where EDB would come in to kind of have a conversation with you to better understand your needs as well. So there are different types of, I guess, existing mechanisms and channels out there. Then there are the VCs as well. So there are all these channels that maybe it's not very well marketed and it's not very well publicized, but I guess the rule of Singapore government is there's no wrong door policy. So you can speak to any one of us, and then we'll have to direct to the right people. I mean, for cases where it's very clear that EDB doesn't have the right mechanisms to support, or ESG doesn't have the right mechanism to support, then it's about channeling it to people who might have the right resources and network to support some of these things.
Okay, thank you. So ESG and SGInnovate, where we're sitting right now, are two places you can go to look for funding. So Terry, let me ask you a question here. Some people are asking, to what level has the discovery of extraterrestrial technology influenced our advancement and our current mobility technology?
It's a difficult question. I think, for example, why, for example, you could ask the question why space is interested in mobility, because it's not our primary job. And for example, if I take the example of autonomy, autonomy is something which is well managed by the space business for a long time. If you consider the probes and all the rockets, so we have at the moment totally autonomous systems, and we know also all the and it's complex, all the process of validation and methodology, which is necessary to have a good confidence in these systems, and especially if you are speaking about extra terrestrial orbits, it's much more complicated because, for example, you have no real-time information from the probe. So the probe needs to be really autonomous. It's not only the command control like it's the case from a satellite. So I think considering also the safety, because for me for the autonomous vehicle, the safety is really one point which is a point to be solved, to really see this technology be present in our city, and also I think that the space with all the constraints based of the safety at a very high level.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Okay, said perfectly then, all right. So I guess let's talk a little bit more about the questions here. We've got, the questions just keep coming in here. I've got several different questions in different forms asking about the status of the space industry in Singapore. So maybe Weitat, you can just say a few words about that.
I think for the Singapore space industry is a pretty good mix of MNCs and startups and even SMEs. So local SMEs like Add Value Technologies and MNCs like SES, Eutelsat, who have headquarters activities here in Singapore. We also have quite a number of interesting startups that we've seen recently. And I guess you might be aware that we are, one of key trust in economic development is basically manpower development. And one of the things that we have been doing is really getting the universities, up to speed in terms of the technologies development, and equipping them with the right skills in terms of small satellite engineering capabilities. And it's also heartening to see that some of these very early stage upstream research projects have also recently spun out into companies, into startups. So looking into materials, and some of them even looking into propulsion technologies. So it's very heartening to see that there are all these developments, and I think the commercial market is slowly picking up, and I think what we're starting to see more companies do here is really to expand that mandate here in Singapore to go beyond just sales and marketing and into actual software development as well. So I think those are the key highlights and happening within Singapore space industry right now.
So then let me ask you a question, Terry. How important is a legal framework for space technology? We have a question here where they refer to a very developed legal framework in France versus what we have here in Singapore. So how important would you say that is?
Regarding the legal framework for the space business? Yes. Okay, for example, you have the example of the necessity to disorbit your satellite. There is a law, for example, because we know we have the problem of all the debris in space, And so if you want to avoid that all satellites remain in space, and they could represent a danger for the other satellite, for low Earth orbit, you have the obligation to lower the orbit and then to be sure that within 20 years, for example, the satellite will be no longer on orbit. So you have, for example, this is a very clear example of regulation. Another regulation, for example, is for the frequency attribution. It's very important. The frequency spectrum is something which is very expensive, I will say. And when you want to develop a new project, to add the capacity to have one frequency bands, it could be a very, very critical point. So the regulation exists, and also we have internal rules just to be in a position to have the highest quality on our product. And it's why when we say that you use off-the-shelf material, piece of equipment, for example, it's true for nano. But if you consider that you want to do some scientific mission or very high resolution satellites, you need to develop something which is very specific, because you don't find it in the commercial market. So the technological point is still important if you want to add the very high performance on your satellite. And sometimes you need it. Depends.
So I guess that's the difference between wide-scale commercialization and specialized R&D efforts too, right? So there's also a different price point for that. I'm wondering if we can put up the second poll question, please. Looks like we've had 25 people respond again. And that question actually feeds into, the poll question's answers actually feed into something that several of you have actually asked separately. So the question is, what would provide the biggest boost to Singapore's new space ecosystem? And we see that mentorship is something that people feel like they don't really need as much. More technical talent, yes, we can always use more of that. More funding, about a third of us want more funding. I'm surprised that that's not more, because startups are always looking for funding. And what's interesting here is the most people, 44% of you, are saying that we need training and education. And that underscores what you guys have been talking about, not only in terms of training and education of scientists and engineers and business people, but also in training and then educating the customers in terms of what we need. This is a topic near and dear to my heart, because our space tech startup actually does training and education. But I think that there are some other really important opportunities in getting the general public to understand how critical space is to their lives today. You know, we all have our mobile phones, we're all being tracked. Mobility is a key part of everybody's lives at this point. And you know, without satellites, we'd be back to where we were 50 years ago in terms of connectivity, and it's very difficult to imagine a world like that. If anybody else has any more questions, let's just go back and look, because I think we basically are done, right? At 7 o'clock, we were gonna end at 7. I'm gonna just go back and see if there are any more burning questions. The numbers keep changing here. Okay, somebody's talking about the Convention of Registration of Orbits Launched into Outer Space. Do you guys know what that is? I thought you had to register your objects if you launched them. So somebody is talking about this. So whoever asked this question, feel free to raise your hand and explain what that is, because I thought you had to register your object. Okay, so anonymous will stay anonymous. All right, then let's go on to just one more question here. So what are the biggest obstacles in achieving the potential of space tech? Launch, payload capability, sensors. Oh, here's political or other factors. So I'll let you guys both handle that.
Could you repeat the question, sorry?
Sure. Where did it go? Keeps changing. What are the biggest obstacles in achieving the potential of space tech? Is it technical, like launches and payload capability and sensors, or is it political and other factors?
Sometimes I think technological could be a temporary barrier, because things are evolving. I think that we have to remind that all the evolution is linked to the evolution of the integrated circuits. So if we are able now to do nanosatellite, it's due to this tremendous evolution of integrated circuits. And all this technology will not be available, data, mining, and all things like cloud will not be there with this very tremendous evolution. So technological could be a barrier, also financial, because as you told us, it's not easy to convince people that the space solution is a good solution, because you are for example, for communication, you are in competition with the terrestrial network. So it's very difficult to convince people that you have to pay to have a system which is only a complement to their system. For other application, you have the commercial application, but don't forget you have also public funding, which is still very important, considering all the GNSS constellation. They are found by the public states, GPS, US, Galileo, Europe, Beidou, China, and GLONASS, Russia. And you have also to assure the continuity of the system. Imagine that US say no GPS within 10 years, it's catastrophic for the economy. So you have to pay for, and the investment is very important. And we do the same thing for Copernicus. We know that climate change is very, very important. So the satellite is really very efficient to control the Earth, to control the environment, to monitor the environment. And Europe has decided through the Copernicus program to put the money, to give the people the data, to analyze data, and to be in a position to really monitor very precisely this change. And we have also to assure this continuity, because if you say a customer, okay, I will launch a satellite, you will have a lifetime of 3 years, and after nothing, you have no visibility of the time frame of the service, there is a problem. So it's a mix of technological and financial barriers.
So what was the question? What's the biggest obstacle for?
Obstacles. Are they technological? The second one question. How did that get upvoted? Cool Japanese.
I guess I know
company.
where that came from.
Well,
sorry. So what was the question?
The question was, in terms of bottlenecks, is it technical challenges, political challenges, or something else?
Bottleneck to
space tech development.
Space tech development, as in furthering space tech
Correct,
development,
yeah.
is it? In my opinion, it's actually the business model. I think right now there hasn't been a very clear or there isn't an exemplar of how new space is really generating a lot of returns for the investors, or you don't have a really big example of how companies in new space is actually exiting and creating value for investors, those kind of things. And I think that's partially because new space is still very nascent. It's very early in its stage of development and growth. And therefore, you don't really see a lot of very big exits, a very big, big hoo-ha about how revenue models are sustainable and those kind of things. So I think the biggest signal to then watch out for is really OneWeb and Planet, because these two are kind of like leading the race in their respective fields. And once they can demonstrate a very successful business model, I think that will really, when it comes, it will be just like that. And you'll start to see a lot of investors going into this particular new space, is it either for communications or for Earth observation. So I guess what is the biggest obstacle right now is the kind of the lack of a very, a champion within the industry that actually demonstrate that yes, it's a very scalable business model, and it's something that it's really worth looking into. and putting more effort behind. So I guess once that example, or once that case study actually takes off, then you will start to see a lot more momentum in that sense.
So just to flip that around, what we should think about what the drivers are for space tech. Now, in the old days, it was mostly political, right? Because we had governments that were racing against each other to get to the moon, to develop technology. And now that we're more into the commercial realm, yes, there are political considerations, but it is more economic drivers. So as soon as we can solidly commercialize the sector, I think it's going to grow even faster. So I think we're out of time, so let me just make one comment, and then I'm going to just ask the audience, we're going to do a live poll. You're in this group with a bunch of like-minded people. Space is an easy sell, right? Everybody's fascinated by space. We all love to see images from the Hubble or from any other mission, and it's truly just, there's something within us that inspires us when it comes to space technology. So I would encourage you after this to talk to other people, see what their interests are, see if you can find any of the entrepreneurs. There are a number of us here in the audience, and just learn as much as you can. And I hope that you go home and you think about this and share your knowledge and your passion of space with everybody else. So my final question for everybody is, how many people here wanted to be an astronaut when they were a kid? Neither of you guys? Okay, well that's about a third. That's pretty good. One more, all right. Well, let's thank our speakers again. Did you have some closing remarks? All right, well, thank you very much, you guys. Have a great evening.
All right, I think before we end up, we would like to once again thank Mr. Ambassador for joining us today, and also our partners at the French Space Agency, CNES, who have just arrived in Singapore this morning. And as always, we always want to spend a little bit of time at the end of the session, like what Bidushi say, for everyone to connect and network and talk to one another. Throughout the evening, we have some food and drinks at the end as well. And yep, feel free to join us at the next Space Tech events of the year that we are planning in the later half of 2019. Thank you again for joining us tonight.